Sutton Bellamy was humiliated in front of everyone by the man she was about to marry. He left her publicly, saying he no longer wanted her because of her weight. In seconds, she lost her relationship, her dignity, and the future she had imagined. But when she walked out alone, broken and crying, a black car stopped in front of her. Inside was Cillian Renwick, the most feared mafia boss in the city. Cold, powerful, untouchable, and without showing a single emotion, he looked at her and said, "Marry me." After everyone rejected her, why did the most dangerous man choose her? The champagne flute slipped from Sutton Bellamy's fingers at exactly 7:42 on a Saturday evening, and it shattered against the marble floor of the Covington Hotel ballroom in front of 216 guests. But that was not the thing that broke her. The glass was nothing. The glass was already forgotten before the last shard stopped spinning. What broke her was the silence. The way every voice in that gilded room dropped at once, like someone had pulled the air from the space itself. The way the string quartet stopped mid-note. The way the enormous crystal chandelier above her seemed to sway, though it hadn't moved at all. And the way Bryce Hadley, the man she had loved for 4 years, the man who had gotten on one knee 8 months ago in a restaurant they couldn't really afford, the man whose ring she was still wearing on her left hand, stood at the front of the room with a microphone and said the words that would follow her for the rest of her life. "I can't do him in this." He wasn't looking at her. That was the part that burned. He was looking at the crowd as though they were the ones he owed an explanation to. I've tried," he said. His voice cracked, and for one brief, nauseating second, Sutton thought he might cry. But he didn't. He straightened. He adjusted his tie, and then he looked directly at her. "I can't marry someone I'm not attracted to anymore. I can't keep pretending." A murmur rippled through the room. Sutton felt it pass through her body like voltage. Her mother was somewhere behind her. She could hear the sharp intake of breath, the beginning of a word that never came. Her bridesmaids stood near the dessert table in matching lavender dresses, their mouths open, their eyes wide, their bodies frozen in the particular way people freeze when they're witnessing something they'll talk about for years. "Sutton," Bryce said, and the microphone caught every wet syllable. "You know I love you, but I need someone who takes care of herself, or who wants to grow. I've been honest with you about this." He had. That was the cruelest part. He had been telling her for months, at first gently, then with growing impatience. The gym memberships left unused, the meal plans she'd start and abandon. The quiet disappointment when she reached for bread at dinner. He'd said it with his eyes before he ever said it with his mouth, and she had felt every silent judgment land on her skin, like a fingerprint she couldn't wash off. But she had never, not once, not in her darkest and most paranoid moment, imagined he would do this. Not here, not in front of everyone she knew. She stood in the middle of the ballroom in a white engagement party dress that had taken her 3 weeks to find. Because nothing fit right. Nothing ever fit right. And she felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room settle on her body like hands pressing down on her shoulders. She didn't cry. That was the thing people would remember later, the detail that would get repeated and misinterpreted and argued about in group chats and brunch conversations for months. Sutton Bellamy did not cry. She stood perfectly still. She looked at Bryce. She looked at him the way you look at a door that has just closed and locked from the other side, not with anger, not with pleading, but with the slow, devastating understanding that no amount of knocking would open it again. Then she walked out. She didn't run. She didn't cover her face. She walked through the double doors of the Covington Hotel ballroom with her shoulders back and her chin level, and the click of her heels on marble was the only sound in the room. 216 people watched her go, and not one of them followed. The lobby was cold. The air conditioning hit her bare arms, and she felt her skin contract, felt the goosebumps rise along the flesh that Bryce had decided was too much. She walked past the front desk, past the concierge, past a couple checking in, with matching luggage and easy, oblivious smiles. She walked through the revolving glass door and out onto the sidewalk, where the September air was warm and smelled like exhaust and the faint, sugary scent of someone's perfume. She stopped. She had nowhere to go. The apartment was Bryce's. Her name wasn't on the lease. Her car was in the hotel parking garage, but her keys were in her clutch, and her clutch was on the table inside, next to the centerpiece she had spent 4 hours arranging the day before, next to the place card, with her name written in calligraphy she had chosen herself. She stood on the sidewalk outside the Covington Hotel in a white dress that no longer meant anything, and she pressed her back against the stone wall, and she breathed. In, out, in, out. The tears came then, not the dramatic, cinematic kind. The quiet kind. The kind that leak out without permission and slide down your face so slowly you can feel the exact path they take. She pressed her fingers against her eyes and held them there, as though she could push the grief back in. That was when the black car pulled up. It was long and dark and utterly silent. The kind of vehicle that doesn't need to announce itself, because its presence is the announcement. It slowed to a stop directly in front of her. The rear window lowered 3 inches. "Get in." The voice was low, male, stripped of any identifiable emotion. Sutton didn't move. She kept her fingers pressed against her eyes. "I'm not getting in a stranger's car. You're standing alone outside a hotel in a dress you can't go back inside wearing. Your keys are in a room full of people who just watched you be humiliated. You have no phone, no wallet, no way home." She lowered her hands. Through the narrow gap in the window, she could see nothing but darkness and the faint outline of a jaw. "How do you know all that?" "I was inside." A long pause. The September wind pushed a strand of hair across her face. She don't brush it away. "Who are you?" The window lowered another 2 inches. She could see him now, partially, sharp cheekbones, dark hair cut close, eyes that were the color of slate and just as hard. He was wearing a black suit with no tie, and he sat in the back seat of that car with the particular stillness of a man who has never once in his life been in a hurry. "My name is Cillian Renwick." The name landed in her chest like a stone dropped in water. She knew it. Everyone in this city knew it. Cillian Renwick, whose name appeared in newspaper articles that were always careful to use the word alleged. Cillian Renwick, whose family had built half the waterfront and buried the other half. Cillian Renwick, who was 38 years old and had never been photographed smiling. "I know who you are," she said. "Then you know I'm not someone who wastes time." He paused. The car's engine idled without sound. "I have a proposition for you. I just had a very bad night. I'm aware. That's why I'm here." She stared at him. The tears had stopped, replaced by something colder, something sharp enough to cut through the fog of humiliation. "What kind of proposition?" "Marry me." She almost laughed. It rose in her throat like a bubble, and she swallowed it down because there was nothing in his face, nothing that suggested he was joking. His expression was exactly the same as it had been when he told her to get in. Flat, still, certain. "You don't know me," she said. "I know enough. You just watched me get publicly destroyed by my fiancé, and your response is to propose?" "My response is to offer you a solution." "To what problem?" He studied her for a moment. The streetlight caught the edge of his face, and she saw a thin scar along his left temple, barely visible, almost decorative. "Get in the car, Sutton. I'll explain on the way." "On the way where?" "Somewhere that isn't a sidewalk." She stood there. She looked at the revolving glass door of the Covington Hotel. She could still see the warm light of the lobby through it, could imagine the ballroom beyond, the murmuring crowd, Bryce standing at the front, with the microphone still in his hand, and the expression of a man who had just unburdened himself at someone else's expense. She got on the car. The interior smelled like leather and something faintly herbal. Not cologne, something subtler, something that had been there so long it had become part of the air itself. The seats were dark. There was a partition between them and the driver. Cillian Renwick sat on the far side, one hand resting on his knee, the other on the armrest between them. He didn't look at her. The car pulled away from the curb. "I need a wife," he said, as though he were stating that he needed to pick up dry cleaning. "There are dating apps for that. I don't need a romantic partner. I need a legal wife, someone real, someone who can stand beside me at events and not be made of plastic." "Why me?" "Because 10 minutes ago, you walked out of a room full of people who just watched you be eviscerated, and you didn't break. You didn't scream. You didn't beg. You held yourself together with more composure than anyone in that room could have managed, including the man who did it to you." The words sat between them in the dark car. Sutton felt them land one at a time, like coins being counted. "That's not a reason to marry someone." "It's the only reason that matters to me." She turned to look at him. In the passing streetlights, his face appeared and disappeared in fragments. The jaw, the cheekbone, the scar, the eyes. He sat perfectly still. He breathed evenly. He looked like a man who had made a decision weeks ago and was only now delivering it. "What would I get out of it?" she asked. "Financial security, protection, a home that no one can take from you, a life that doesn't depend on someone else deciding you're enough." That last part hit something raw. She turned away, looked out the window. Buildings slid past like dark teeth. "How long?" 2 years minimum. After that, we renegotiate. "And in those 2 years, you live in my house, you attend events with me, you play the role." "What role?" "My wife." "And what do you play?" He looked at her then. For the first time, something moved behind those slate-colored eyes. Not warmth, not kindness, but something adjacent to recognition. Something that said, "I see you, and you are not what I expected." "I play myself," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the most honest answer I've ever given anyone." The car turned onto a street she didn't recognize. The buildings here were taller, darker, the kind of architecture that announces wealth by how much space it takes up and how little it shows. Cillian reached into his jacket and produced a card. Plain white, heavy stock, nothing but a phone number printed in small black type. "You have until noon tomorrow," he said. "Call the number. Say yes or no, to. If you say no, you'll never hear from me again." He handed her the card. His fingers didn't touch hers. "If I say yes, then we begin." The car stopped. She looked out the window and realized they were in front of her mother's house. The porch light was on. The garden she had helped plant as a teenager was overgrown now. The roses leggy and wild. But the light was warm, and the door was there, and it was a place she could go. "How did you know where my mother lives?" "I told you, I don't waste time." She opened the door. The night air rushed in, breaking the sealed quiet of the car's interior. She stepped out onto the sidewalk and turned back to look at him. This man, this stranger, this name that people whispered with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Why me?" she asked again. The real reason. Something shifted in his face. It was so subtle that she almost missed it. A tightening around the mouth, a shadow that passed behind the eyes like a cloud crossing a winter sky. He looked at her, and for one fraction of a second, Cillian Rennick did not look like a man in control. "Because I've been watching you walk into rooms for months," he said quietly, "and you are the only person I've ever seen who looks more afraid of being seen than of being alone." The window went up. The car pulled away. Sutton stood on her mother's sidewalk with a white card in her hand and a white dress on her body and the entire architecture of her life in rubble around her feet. She went inside. Her mother, Pauline, was asleep in the recliner with the television on and a crossword puzzle book open on her lap. The house smelled like lavender and the particular brand of lemon cleaner that Pauline had used for 30 years. Sutton locked the door behind her. She walked to the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror. She saw what Bryce had seen. The round face, the soft arms, the body that took up space in a world that rewarded women for shrinking. She saw the mascara tracks on her cheeks and the way her dress pulled at the waist, and she felt the full, crushing weight of being a woman who had just been told, in front of everyone she knew, that her body was the reason she wasn't worth loving. She looked at the card in her hand. She looked at the mirror. She looked at the card again, At 11:47 the next morning, 13 minutes before the deadline, Sutton Bellamy picked up her mother's phone and dialed the number. Yes, she said. Nothing else. There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice. Not Cillian's, someone else. Someone efficient and neutral. A car will be at your location in 45 minutes. Pack for 3 days. The line went dead. 3 days became a week. A week became a month. The month became a marriage. The ceremony was small. That was the wrong word. It was minimal. A courthouse, a judge, 2 witnesses Sutton had never met. Both men in dark suits who stood at precise distances from each other and never spoke. Cillian wore black. Sutton wore a gray dress she had found in her mother's closet, because she couldn't bear to buy another white one. The judge read the words. Cillian said, "I do," the way other men say, "noted." Sutton said it the way you agree to a medical procedure you're not fully sure about, but have decided is better than the alternative. There was no kiss. The judge looked at them expectantly. Cillian looked at Sutton. Sutton looked at the floor. The moment passed like a skipped heartbeat, and then Cillian signed the papers, and Sutton signed the papers, and it was done. The house, his house, their house, the house she was supposed to call home, was enormous in the way that only truly wealthy people's houses are enormous. Not showy, not gilded, but vast. Rooms opened into rooms. Hallways led to hallways. The ceilings were high and the walls were white, and every surface was clean, in a way that suggested professional maintenance rather than human habitation. It was beautiful and cold, and it felt like living inside a museum after hours. Sutton's room was on the 2nd floor, not their room. Her room. Cillian had been specific about this. She would have her own space, her own bathroom, her own closet that was larger than her mother's entire bedroom. He was across the hall. The door was always closed. The first night she lay in a king-sized bed, with sheets that probably cost more than her car payment. And she stared at the ceiling and she thought, what have I done? She didn't know. She still didn't know 3 weeks later, when the rhythm of the house had begun to settle around her like sediment at the bottom of a glass. Cillian left early. Cillian came home late. Cillian spoke to her at dinner. They ate together every evening. That was one of his rules. But the conversation was functional. Brief. Weather reports from another planet. How was your day? Fine. Yours? Productive. Silence. The sound of silverware. On porcelain. The housekeeper said you didn't leave the house today. Sutton looked up from her plate. I didn't have anywhere to go. You're not a prisoner. I know. Do you? She held his gaze. His eyes were the same flat slate as the night they'd met. But she had begun to notice variations. The way they darkened when he was irritated, lightened when he was thinking, went absolutely blank when someone said something that landed too close to whatever he was protecting. I went for a walk this morning, she said, around the grounds. And you have a lot of roses. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, not a smile. The ghost of one. The memory of what a smile might look like if it were allowed to exist. My mother planted those, he said. It was the first personal thing he had ever told her. She held it carefully, the way you hold a bird that has landed on your hand unexpectedly. Still, barely breathing, afraid that any movement will send it away. They're beautiful, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked away. More wine? No, thank you. The dinner ended. He went to his study. She went to her room. The house was quiet. The roses grew in the dark outside her window, and she thought about his mother and the way his voice had changed. Just barely, just enough. When he mentioned her, weeks passed. Sutton began to map the house the way a cartographer maps unfamiliar territory, not just the rooms and hallways, but the patterns. Cillian's patterns. He drank his coffee black, standing at the kitchen island, reading something on his phone with his back to the room. He went to the gym at 5 a.m. He took calls in his study with the door locked. He kept no photographs anywhere in the house, no family pictures on mantels, no framed memories on desks. The walls were art, all of it abstract, all of it expensive, all of it saying nothing. She noticed other things, the way the staff moved around him, not with fear exactly, but with a heightened awareness, the way animals move near something large and unpredictable, the way his phone rang constantly, but he answered it rarely, the way he sometimes stood at the window of his study at night, just standing, just looking out, and the reflection of his face in the glass was the face of a man who was very far away from where his body was. She began to eat meals in the kitchen instead of the dining room on the nights he wasn't home. The kitchen was warmer, more human. She befriended the cook, a woman named Rosalind who had worked for the Renwick family for 22 years and who told Sutton on her third week, the first real piece of information anyone in the house had volunteered. "He hasn't brought anyone here in 6 years, Rosalind said, not looking up from the onions she was dicing. "Not a woman, not a friend, not a soul. You're the first person to sleep under this roof besides him since his sister died." Sutton's hand stopped halfway to the bread basket. His sister? Rosalind's knife paused for one beat. Two, then resumed. Amara. She was younger. She lived here with him after their mother passed. She was... Rosalind shook her head. She was the light in this house, the only light. What happened to her? That's not my story to tell. Sutton didn't push, but the name lodged itself in her mind like a splinter, Amara, and she began to notice things she hadn't noticed before. A door on the 3rd floor that was always locked. A garden bench near the roses that had initials carved into it. A.R. A subtle change in Cillian's posture whenever the month of November was mentioned, a tightening of the shoulders, a withdrawal so complete. It was like watching someone leave a room without moving. She was beginning to understand that this house was not empty. It was haunted. Not by ghosts, but by the particular kind of grief that a man like Cillian Renwick would never name, never discuss, and never, under any circumstances, allow anyone to see. One evening in late October, 5 weeks after the courthouse ceremony, Cillian told her over dinner that they would be attending an event. What kind of event? A gala. The Mercer Foundation. Philanthropy. Politics. The usual performance. When? Saturday. I don't have anything to wear to a gala. He looked at her. Looked at her the way he always looked at her, directly without the social softening that most people use when they study another person's body. It wasn't unkind, it was simply honest, in the way that a man who has never learned to pretend assessments. His gaze moved from her face, to her hands, to the way she held herself in the chair, and she felt the old, familiar heat of self-consciousness rise in her chest, the reflex that Bryce had trained into her, the instinct to shrink, to apologize for the space she occupied. But Cillian didn't look at her the way Bryce had. There was no disappointment in it, no judgment. He looked at her the way you look at a landscape, taking it in without asking it to be different. "A stylist will come Friday afternoon," he said. "Choose whatever you want, whatever makes you feel comfortable." Comfortable isn't really the point of a gala, is it? It's the only point. If you're uncomfortable, everyone will see it and they'll use it. The people at this event, they're not good people, Sutton. They smile because it's a weapon. They ask questions because the answers are ammunition. Every conversation is a transaction, and every transaction has a winner. And you want me there? I need you there. There's a difference. The stylist arrived Friday afternoon. Her name was Margot, and she was the kind of woman who spoke almost entirely in fabric names and who treated Sutton's body like a problem she was excited to solve. She brought racks, she brought options, she brought shoes that Sutton couldn't imagine walking in, and jewelry that Sutton couldn't imagine touching. Sutton tried on 7 dresses before Margot held up the 8th, a deep burgundy gown, floor length, with a structured bodice and sleeves that draped like water. It was not designed to hide anything. It was designed to hold everything, to frame, to honor. Sutton looked at herself in the mirror and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not beautiful. That word was too loaded, too tied to the metrics that Bryce had used to measure her. Something else, something more like presence. Like the dress was saying, "You are here, and here is exactly where you should be." "That one," Margot said and smiled. "That's the one." Saturday night, the Mercer Foundation Gala. A ballroom again. Sutton felt the irony like a blade between her ribs. But this one was larger, grander, more aggressively opulent than the Covington. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls. Tables dressed in black and gold. A string quartet playing something appropriately elegant. Hundreds of people in clothes that cost more than some people's houses, laughing and touching and performing the particular brand of ease that only the extremely wealthy can afford. Cillian walked in with Sutton on his arm, and the room shifted. It was imperceptible to anyone who wasn't watching closely, but Sutton was watching. She felt it, the way conversations adjusted, the way eyes moved, the way the social physics of the room rearranged themselves around his presence like filings around a magnet. He walked slowly. He kept her close. He introduced her to people whose names she recognized from news and politics, and he did it simply. "This is my wife, Sutton." And every time he said it, she felt the word land differently. Wife, possessive, protective, a word that meant something in this room, in this world, among these people who understood that the person standing next to Cillian Renwick was not standing there by accident. She survived the first hour. She survived the second. She drank water, not wine. She smiled when spoken to. She answered questions carefully. She noticed the way some people looked at her body, and then at Cillian, and then back at her, the silent calculation visible on their faces. Why her? Why her? Why her? And she felt the old wound pulse, but she held it. It was during the third hour that she saw him, Bryce. He was standing near the bar, with a woman Sutton didn't recognize. Tall, thin, blonde, the kind of woman who looked like she had been assembled from a magazine's idea of what a woman should be. Bryce was laughing. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man who had recently dropped a heavy weight and was enjoying the lightness. He saw Sutton at the same moment she saw him, and his face did something complicated. Surprise, then discomfort, then something that looked almost like amusement. He said something to the blonde woman. Then he walked toward Sutton. Cillian was 3 feet away, speaking to a man in a gray suit about something financial. He didn't see Bryce approach, or if he did, he didn't react. Sutton. Bryce smiled. It was his public smile, the one that showed all of his teeth and none of his thoughts. "I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to be here." He looked her up and down. The burgundy dress, the posture, the ring on her finger, a simple platinum band that Cillian had given her without ceremony or sentiment, the way you hand someone a house key. "You look..." Bryce paused, searching for the right word the way a man searches for his keys while the house is already locked. "Different." "Thank you. I heard you got married." "I did. Fast." "Yes." Bryce leaned closer. His cologne was the same, that woodsy, slightly sweet scent that she had once found comforting and now found suffocating. "People are talking, you know, about you and Renwick. They're saying well..." He laughed softly. "They're saying a lot of things. People always say a lot of things. They're saying he married you out of pity." Bryce tilted his head. His eyes were doing that thing they used to do when he was about to say something he believed was honest, but was actually just cruel. Or as some kind of business arrangement. Because let's be real, Sutton. A man like Renwick doesn't what? The voice came from behind Bryce, low, level, cold enough to change the temperature of the air itself. Bryce turned. Cillian Renwick was standing directly behind him, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of water he hadn't sipped from. His expression was perfectly neutral. His eyes were not. "A man like me doesn't what?" Cillian repeated. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words came out, with the quiet precision of a scalpel. Bryce straightened. To his credit, or perhaps to his detriment, he didn't back down. I was just catching up with Sutton. I know what you were doing. Cillian took one step forward. Just one. It was enough. The space between them shrank, and Bryce's confidence shrank with it, visible in the slight lean backward, the unconscious yielding. You were standing in my house. Because make no mistake, this event exists because of my family's money, and you were speaking to my wife, and you were doing what you've always done, which is trying to make her feel small so you can feel large. The words were barely above a whisper, but they carried. The people nearest to them had stopped talking. The ripple was spreading. That's not, Bryce started. You had her, Cillian said. You had her, and you stood in front of 200 people and told them she wasn't enough. You said it into a microphone. You made it performance. He paused, let the silence land. And you did it because you are a profoundly ordinary man who was terrified of being with someone extraordinary, because her existence reminded you of everything you're not. Bryce's face went white, then red, then, something between the two, a mottled flush that crept up from his collar like a stain. Now. Cillian's voice was still low, still controlled, still carrying the specific gravity of a man who has never once in his life needed to yell. You're going to walk away from my wife, you're going to leave this event, and you're going to spend the rest of your life understanding that the woman you threw away is the only remarkable thing that ever happened to you. Bryce opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Sutton, and in his eyes she saw something she had never seen before. Not anger, not defiance, but the slow, sick recognition of a man who is beginning to understand that he has made the worst mistake of his life, and there is no revision, no edit, no undo. He left. Cillian turned to Sutton. His face was still composed, still the mask he wore to every room he entered, but she saw the faintest tremor in the hand holding the water glass, and she understood, with a clarity that felt like light breaking through clouds, that what he had just done had cost him something, that the words had not been performance, that somewhere inside the controlled machinery of Cillian Renwick, something had been genuinely, viscerally angry, not on his own behalf, but on hers. Are you all right? He asked. Yes. Good. He looked at her for 1 second longer than necessary. Then he turned and walked back toward the gray-suited man, and the conversation resumed, and the gala continued, and the string quartet played, and the chandeliers glittered, and Sutton stood in her burgundy dress, with her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. That night in the car going home, neither of them spoke for 12 minutes. Sutton counted. The city passed outside the tinted windows, and the silence in the back seat was different from every silence that had come before it. It was warm, full, thick with something neither of them was willing to name. You didn't have to do that, she finally said. I know. Why did you? He looked at her. In the passing streetlight, his face was half lit and half shadow, and for one fleeting instant she saw behind the mask, saw the tiredness, the weight, the years of carrying something that never got lighter. He opened his mouth as though he were about to say something that mattered, something that would change the shape of everything between them. Then he closed it, turned back to the window. Because no one else was going to, he said. The car carried them home in silence, and the silence said more than anything either of them had spoken all night. Something shifted after the gala. Not dramatically. Nothing about Cillian was dramatic. Nothing about their arrangement was designed for revelation. But the air in the house changed the way air changes in early spring, when the cold hasn't left, but the warmth is coming, and you can feel both at once. He started eating breakfast at the kitchen island instead of alone, in his study. Not every day, but Tuesdays and Thursdays, Sutton would come downstairs and find him there with his black coffee and his phone, and he would look up and say morning, and she would say morning, and they would exist in the same space without needing to fill it with words. It was a small thing. It was everything she started reading in the library, his library, the enormous walnut-paneled room on the first floor, with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a leather chair that was positioned next to a window overlooking the rose garden. She chose it because it was warm and because the light was good, and she didn't ask permission because he had told her she wasn't a prisoner, and she was beginning to believe him. One evening, he came in looking for something, a book, a document, she never found out, and stopped when he saw her curled in the chair with a novel. "Sorry," she said, starting to rise. "I can go." "Don't." She settled back down. He stood there for a moment, his hand on the doorframe, his eyes on her in a way that was different from how he usually looked at her. Softer, almost confused, as though he had walked into a room expecting to find it empty, and instead found it full of something he didn't know he needed. "What are you reading?" he asked. She held up the cover. He nodded. Then he turned and left, and she heard his footsteps recede down the hallway. And when she returned to the library the next evening, there was a second chair. She didn't comment on it. He didn't explain it, but from that night forward, 2 or 3 times a week, he would appear in the library at around 9 o'clock with a glass of something dark and a book of his own. They would read in the same room without speaking. The fire would burn low, the house would settle, and in the quality of that silence, in the texture of shared space that asks for nothing and offers everything, something began to grow between them. Fragile, unnamed, cautious as a plant, pushing through frozen ground. She still had bad days. Days when the mirror was an enemy, and the memory of Bryce's microphone played on a loop, and she couldn't leave her room until the feeling passed. On those days, she noticed that Cillian noticed. He never said anything, but there would be flowers on the kitchen island, not roses, something simpler, wildflowers from the edge of the property, and there would be an extra log on the library fire, and once, just once, she found a note on her nightstand in handwriting that was sharp and angular and unmistakably his. "You are here because I chose you. Don't let the past choose for you." She held the note for a long time. She didn't cry, but it was close. It was the closest she had come in weeks, and the tears she didn't shed felt different from the ones she had cried outside the Covington. Less like grief, and more like the strange, painful relief of being seen by someone who isn't looking away. November came, and Cillian withdrew. It happened gradually at first, then all at once, the way a tide goes out. He stopped appearing in the library. He stopped eating breakfast at the island. He came home later and later, and when he was home, his door was closed and the house was silent, in the way that only a house occupied by someone who is deliberately hiding can be silent. Sutton felt the distance and did not push against it. She had learned in her years with Bryce the difference between a person who needs space and a person who is running. Bryce had always been running. Bull Cillian was standing still, in the dark, waiting for something to pass. On November 14th, she asked Rosalind. "It's the anniversary," Rosalind said. She was kneading bread. Her hands moved with the steady rhythm of a woman who has worked through grief so many times. It has become part of the motion. "Amara, 3 years today." "How did she die?" Rosalind stopped kneading. She looked at Sutton with eyes that were full and careful and old. "She was killed, not by anyone in the business. That's what people always assume, but they're wrong. She was in a car accident, hit by a drunk driver on the interstate at 2 in the morning. She was 26 years old, and she was driving home from a dinner party, and some man who'd had 9 drinks at a bar in Ridgemont crossed the median and hit her head on." Sutton felt the words like a physical impact. She pressed her hand flat against the kitchen counter. "Cillian was the one who identified the body," Rosalind continued. "He was the one who buried her. He was the one who sat in that garden for 3 days afterward and didn't eat and didn't speak and didn't let anyone near him. And after that," she shook her head. "After that, the house went dark. He went dark. He became what he is now." "What is he now?" "A man who is afraid that anyone he lets in will be taken from him." Sutton left the kitchen. She walked through the house, up the stairs, down the second-floor hallway, past her room, past his closed door. She kept going. up the narrow staircase to the third floor. To the door that was always locked. She tried the handle. It turned. The room was small. A bedroom, but preserved. Not like a shrine. More like a held breath. The bed was made. The curtains were drawn. There were photographs here, the only photographs in the entire house, framed, arranged on the dresser, and the nightstand, and the windowsill. A woman with dark hair and Cillian's cheekbones and a smile that was wide and unguarded, and absolutely nothing like her brother's. Amara laughing, Amara at the beach. Amara with her arm around a younger Cillian. A Cillian who was smiling, actually smiling, a smile that transformed his face so completely that Sutton almost didn't recognize him. And there, on the nightstand, next to a photograph of Amara, in a garden holding a trowel and laughing at the camera, was a second photograph, smaller, in a plain frame. Sutton picked it up. It was a photograph of a fundraiser, one of those generic charity events, with round tables and bad lighting, and people holding drinks and smiling for cameras. In the center of the frame, slightly out of focus, was a woman, large, dark-haired, standing alone at the edge of the crowd, with her arms crossed and her chin slightly raised, and an expression that was both wary and defiant, as though she had been told she didn't belong and had decided to stay anyway. It was Sutton. She stared at it. The photo was from the Ellison Foundation dinner 8 months ago. She had gone alone. Bryce had been supposed to come but canceled at the last minute, some excuse about work. And she had spent the entire evening feeling conspicuous and uncomfortable and wishing she could disappear into the walls. She had left early. She hadn't thought anyone had noticed she was there at all, but someone had. Someone had noticed, and someone had taken this photograph or obtained it, and someone had placed it in this room full of the only person Cillian Renwick had ever loved, and put it next to her picture. She heard him before she saw him. The floorboard in the hallway creaked, and she turned, and he was standing in the doorway. He looked at the photograph in her hand. His face went absolutely still, not the controlled stillness she was accustomed to, but a deeper, more desperate stillness, the stillness of a man who has been discovered. "How long?" she asked. 8 months. "You watched me for 8 months?" "I noticed you for 8 months. There's a difference. Why didn't you approach me? You were engaged. So you waited until I wasn't." He said nothing. His jaw tightened. His hands hanging at his sides, clenched once, then released. "Amara used to talk about this," Sutton said carefully. She set the photograph back on the nightstand, next to the one of his sister. About people who disappear into the edges of rooms. She didn't disappear. She was pushed there. I wasn't talking about her. Their eyes met. The room was dim, and the air was thick with dust and memory, and the particular sadness of preserved spaces, and in the half-light, Cillian Renwick looked exactly like what he was. Not a feared man, not a powerful man, not the name that made people lower their voices and check their words. He looked like a man who had lost someone he could not live without, and had been trying, unsuccessfully, for 3 years to survive the absence. "Amara was like you," he said. His voice was low, lower than usual, scraped raw. She was soft where the world wanted her to be hard. She took up space that people told her she didn't deserve, and she did it with this quiet, unshakable dignity that made everyone around her feel small for having tried to make her less. He paused, swallowed. "When she died, I decided I would never let that happen again. I would never watch someone like her be diminished. I would never stand by while the world tried to crush someone who had done nothing wrong except exist in a body that other people found inconvenient. And then you saw me. And then I saw you." Sutton felt the tears come, and this time she let them. Not the quiet, leaking tears of the sidewalk outside the Covington. Real tears. The kind that come from somewhere deep and break through every wall you've built, and leave you standing in the open, exposed, terrified, and more alive than you've been in years. "You chose me because I reminded you of her," she said, It wasn't an accusation. It was a question. I chose you because you reminded me that there are people worth protecting. He took one step into the room. Just one. Amara was the reason I understood that. You were the reason I remembered. That's not love, Cillian. No, he said. It's not. He looked at her. She looked at him. The photographs of Amara watched from the dresser and the nightstand and the windowsill, and the house was silent, and the roses grew in the November garden below, and the night pressed against the windows like a hand on glass. But it might become something, he said. It was the most terrifying sentence either of them had ever heard, because it was true, and because truth in a house built on control and silence and the careful management of grief was the most dangerous thing of all. Sutton didn't move, neither did he. They stood on opposite sides of a dead woman's bedroom, 6 feet apart, and the distance between them was simultaneously nothing and everything. Tell me about her, Sutton said. Cillian closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. She had never seen that before, had never imagined it possible, and the sight of it rearranged something fundamental in her understanding of who he was. She was 26, he said. She loved terrible movies and good wine, and she couldn't cook anything except scrambled eggs, and she laughed too loudly in restaurants, and she called me every Sunday morning to tell me what she dreamed about, and most of the dreams were nonsensical, and she'd laugh while she was telling them, and I'd pretend to be annoyed, and she always knew I wasn't. He stopped. His hand found the doorframe and gripped it. She was the only person who ever saw me without my armor on, and when she died, I put the armor back on, and I welded it shut. And then you married a stranger. And then I married you. Why? Because the armor was killing me, Sutton. And you were the first person in 3 years who made me think it might be possible to take it off. She crossed the room, not quickly, slowly, with the deliberateness of someone making a choice they understand the weight of. She stopped in front of him. He was taller than her by nearly a foot, and she had to look up to meet his eyes. And when she did, she saw something she had never seen in any man who had ever looked at her. Not desire, not pity, not judgment, but the raw, unprotected expression of a person who is trusting another person with the most fragile part of themselves. She reached up and pressed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart. She felt it beating, fast, faster than she expected. Faster than a man made of stone should have any right to beat. Then take it off, she said. He didn't. Not then. Not completely. But he lifted his hand and placed it over hers, and they stood like that for a long time in the half-light of his sister's room, and the house was no longer silent. It was full. Full of grief and possibility, and the terrifying, exhilarating recognition that the thing growing between them was not arrangement, not strategy, not obligation, but the slow, painful, beautiful beginning of something real. The weeks after the night in Amara's room were different, but differently. The change was not a river breaking through a dam. It was a thaw, gradual, uneven, with frequent refreezing. Cillian's did not become warm. He became less cold. And the difference Sutton was learning was everything. He began leaving doors open. His study door, which had always been shut, now stood ajar on certain evenings, and she could hear the low murmur of his phone calls. Not the words, just the cadence, the rhythm of command. The library sessions continued, but now he sometimes looked up from his book and watched her, and when she caught him, he didn't look away. He held her gaze for 1 beat, 2 beats, 3, and then returned to his pages without explanation, as though looking at her was simply something he did now, like breathing or checking the time. She began to learn his vocabulary of silence. There was the silence of work, which was focused and impenetrable, the silence of distance, which was cold and intentional, the silence of grief, which arrived every November and lingered like weather. And then there was this new silence, the silence of proximity, of wanting to speak but not yet knowing the words, of standing at the edge of something and looking down. They were in the library on a Tuesday night in December when she found the book. She had been browsing the shelves. She did this often, running her fingers along spines the way you run your hand along a railing, and a book on the top shelf caught her eye. Not because of its title, which was unremarkable, a history of maritime trade in the 18th century, but because it was the only book on the entire shelf that showed signs of wear. The spine was cracked. The pages were soft. It had been read many times. She pulled it down. A slip of paper fell out. She caught it before it hit the ground. It was a letter, handwritten in round, looping script that was nothing like Cillian's sharp angles. The paper was cream-colored and soft with handling. See, stop pretending you don't need people. You're not a castle. You're a person. Castles fall down when no one lives in them, and so do you. I love you, you impossible man. Let someone in before it's too late. Sutton read it 3 times. She heard Cillian turn a page behind her. She held the letter and felt the weight of it. Not the paper, which was light, but the love in it, which was enormous. She put it back in the book. She put the book back on the shelf. She sat down in her chair. Cillian. He looked up. Your sister was right about you. He stared at her. His expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. A door opening somewhere deep in the house of himself, a window cracking in a room that had been sealed for years. I know, he said, and the 2 words held more grief and honesty and surrender than anything else he had ever said in her presence. That night, he walked her to her bedroom door. He had never done this before. They had always parted ways in the hallway with a nod or a good night that was more dismissal than farewell. But tonight he walked beside her, his footsteps matching hers, and when they reached her door, he stopped. She turned to face him. The hallway was dim. The light from the sconce on the wall caught the angles of his face and cast the rest in shadow. Good night, she said. He nodded, started to turn, then stopped. Sutton. Yes? He was looking at her with the expression she had seen once before, in the car, the night of the gala, when he had almost said something and then didn't. The expression of a man at the edge of a cliff, deciding. He lifted his hand. Slowly, and with the back of his fingers, and not his palm, not a touch of possession or desire, but something gentler, something more precise. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. His knuckles grazed her temple. The contact lasted less than 2 seconds. Then his hand dropped. His jaw tightened. He stepped back. Good night, he said, and walked away. Sutton stood in the hallway for a long time after his door closed. She pressed her fingers to the spot where his hand had been, and she felt the absence of it, like a sound that had just stopped. A ringing in the air, a vibration she could feel in her bones. She went into her room. She sat on the bed. She thought about Bryce, who had touched her constantly in the beginning. Hands on her waist, arm around her shoulders, fingers laced through hers in public, and how every touch had felt like a claim, a statement of ownership made for an audience. And she thought about Cillian's 2 seconds of contact in a dim hallway with no one watching, and how it had felt like the most honest thing a man had ever done in her presence. She thought about that for a very long time. Christmas arrived with the subtlety of a season that doesn't know it's supposed to be different. The house was decorated, by the staff, Sutton assumed, because the idea of Cillian hanging tinsel was absurd. But the decorations were tasteful and restrained. Whites and silvers and greens, nothing garish, nothing that called too much attention to the fact that this was supposed to be a time of joy. Cillian gave her a gift on Christmas morning. He left it on the kitchen island, wrapped in dark paper, no card. She opened it at the counter while Rosalind pretended not to watch. It was a leather journal. The cover was embossed with her initials, S.B.R. The R stopped her. She ran her thumb over it. S.B.R. Sutton Bellamy Renwick. Her married name. The name she had taken but never used, had never heard spoken aloud, had never seen written down. And here it was, pressed into leather by someone who had thought to include it, who had decided, quietly and without discussion, that she was part of his name now. She looked up. Cillian was leaning against the opposite counter with his coffee, watching her with an expression that was carefully neutral, but not quite neutral enough. There was something in his eyes, Something watchful, something almost anxious, the look of a man who is given a gift and does not know if it will be received. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, sipped his coffee. "Merry Christmas." She wanted to say more. She wanted to cross the kitchen and stand in front of him and ask him what this was, what they were becoming, whether the thing she felt when he looked at her was the same thing he felt when he looked at her. But she didn't. Because the thing growing between them was still young, still fragile. And she understood, with the wisdom of someone who has already lost love once by holding too tightly, that some things die when you name them too early. "Merry Christmas," she said. The winter deepened. January was cold and white. Sutton began writing in the journal, not about Cillian, not about Bryce, but about herself, about who she had been before either of them, about the girl who had loved books and quiet rooms and the particular pleasure of being alone without being lonely, about the woman she was becoming now in this strange, echoing house with its roses and its ghosts and its locked rooms and its man who showed love the way some people show pain, reluctantly, briefly, and only when they can't hold it back any longer. She began to feel something she hadn't felt in years, something she hadn't felt since before Bryce's first comment about her weight, before the gym memberships and the diet plans, and the slow, steady erosion of her belief that she was allowed to exist without apology. She began to feel whole, not because of Cillian, not because a man had defended her, or noticed her, or placed her photograph next to his dead sister's, but because the space he had given her, the room, the library, the quiet mornings, the freedom to move through a house without being measured, had allowed her to find the parts of herself she had let Bryce bury. The intelligence, the humor, the stubbornness, the quiet, unshakable core that had walked her out of that ballroom at the Covington with her chin up and her shoulders back when every cell in her body had been screaming at her to collapse. She was not becoming someone new. She was uncovering someone old, and the process was painful and slow and beautiful, the way all real recoveries are. One evening in early February, Sutton was writing in the library when Cillian came in and sat in his chair and did not pick up a book. He sat there with his hands on the armrests and his eyes on the fire, and the firelight moved across his face in slow, warm waves. "I need to tell you something," he said. She set down her pen. "Okay. I have spent 3 years grieving my sister, and in that time I've done things I'm not proud of. I have hurt people. I have shut people out. I have used the business, the family, the name, all of it, as an excuse to avoid being a human being." He paused. The fire cracked. "I married you because I thought I could control it. I thought I could bring you into this house and keep you at a distance and have the appearance of a life without the reality of one. I thought you would be convenient." She felt the word like a needle. Convenient. She held still. "I was wrong." He turned to look at her. The fire was behind him now, and his face was in shadow, and his voice was lower than she had ever heard it. "You are not convenient. You are the most inconvenient thing that has ever happened to me. Because I cannot stop thinking about you, and I do not know what to do about it, and for the first time in 3 years I am afraid. Not of losing someone, but of not being brave enough to hold on." The room was very quiet. The fire burned. The roses slept in the frozen garden outside. "I'm not going to kiss you tonight," he said. "Because if I kiss you tonight, it will be because I can't help it. And I want the first time I kiss you to be a choice. I want it to be deliberate. I want you to know that it's not impulse or loneliness or the ghost of someone else." "Then what is tonight?" "Tonight is me telling you that I am falling in love with you. And I am terrified, and I don't know how to do this, and I need you to be patient with me." Sutton felt the tears again. The real ones. The ones that come from the deepest well. "I can do that," she said. "Even though I'm difficult. Especially because you're difficult." Something happened to his face then. Something extraordinary. The mask cracked. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough for her to see, for one shining, unguarded moment, the man underneath, The man who planted roses because his mother had. The man who kept his sister's room preserved like a prayer. The man who had watched a stranger across a crowded room and seen something no one else had bothered to look for. He smiled. It was small. It was brief. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For being here. For being real. For not letting me hide." She reached across the space between their chairs and placed her hand on his. Armrests close to his hand, but not touching it. An offering. A doorway. After a moment, he moved his hand. Covered hers. Held it. They sat like that for a long time, and the fire burned low, and the house breathed, and somewhere in the distance, the roses waited for spring, and the thing between them, the thing that had begun as an arrangement and grown into a friendship, and was now unmistakably becoming love, settled into the room like light through a window, and it was warm, and it was real, and it was enough. It was more than enough. Outside the library window, the first snow of February began to fall, and the world was white and new, and Sutton Bellamy Renwick, the woman who had been told she wasn't worth loving, the woman who had been destroyed in front of 200 people, the woman who had walked into a stranger's car on the worst night of her life, sat in a leather chair in a warm room with her hand in the hand of a man who was learning, slowly and imperfectly and with great difficulty, how to be human again. And she thought, this is what it means to be chosen. Not in spite of who you are, but because of it. All of it. Every pound. Every scar. Every broken thing you thought. Made you unworthy. This is what it means